When I left Christianity and fundamentalist religious Calvinism, I realized that the church teaches its members that voting is a God-given right and your voice is primary. Now, there's nothing wrong with believing that voting is an American right and privilege. It's not something that is solely an American right and privilege because, as we know, there are hundreds of countries around the world that has the rights, privileges, and protections similar to what America has. So men and women can share their beliefs and their voice. I grew up in a very fundamentalist home where I was expected to vote, and voting was considered an American duty. My own mother said to me a year ago, or about a year ago when the Trump-Harris thing was going on, that voting was something that if you didn't vote, you were not an American, you were less than an American, which I wholeheartedly disagree. She said I should be deported because I didn't vote. And this was 6 months before Trump started deporting people. I find that a little bit ironic and disturbing. Nobody has to vote. There is no law, like there's no law for going to church is mandatory, that you have to vote and have a voice once you're 18 or older, provided you haven't been labeled a convicted felon where you can't vote. I find it ironic that a man who can't vote because he's a felon can hold the presidency. I think not being able to vote should negate your ability to vote and hold an office, a public office. But I guess not. And it's interesting how every country has a different voting process. Of course, some countries, as we unfortunately know about, don't believe in voting. They have a monarchy, perhaps they have an authoritarian dictatorship, and anyone who votes probably would get shot at. There are places where they don't have traditional policies or political parties. I mean, America's pretty screwed up because we only have a two-party group or choice. Countries that have more than two major parties definitely should, I would say, have just a better outcome. But that's not something America is known for, and I don't think it'll ever have more than two parties. I mean, I hope someday, but I don't see the Green Party, the Independent Party, or the Communist Party becoming as big as the Republican or Democrat Party. And voting is a privilege, but it's not mandatory. You're not more of an American, you're not a better person because you vote. It's a choice, and it's something you can exercise, and it's also a right you can choose not to, based on any valid reason. And I don't think there's any reason that isn't valid for not voting. It's interesting how people who identify as conservative Christians, conservative Republicans, believe that the vote of other people is more important than anything else. And I mean, voting is something that's very interesting. It doesn't have to be something you always do. It's not an expectation, and it shouldn't be anything but a choice and an expression of how you feel, what you believe in, what values are important to you. And And it's not something you have to do every single 4 years or every 2 years or whenever and however you choose to vote. It's a possible expression. You're not any less of an American citizen. You're not any less of a patriot or someone who protects vulnerable people or just may or may not want to express how they feel and how they believe and how they live. There's nothing shameful about not voting. Especially in the last few years where it just seems like there's no point to vote because the bad people always seem to win. I did read a statistic somewhere that if everyone who didn't vote actually voted for Harris, Trump would have lost. I think it's interesting, but I don't think you have to vote. It's just a possible expression of what and how you live your life. I didn't vote after 2012 all the way until I actually haven't voted since, because I realized that the 1% who rules over everyone, they really don't care about us. They don't care about anyone but themselves. And they will protect and do everything they can to make it so that we never get a break, we never get anything good. And if we're lucky to have a few politicians who actually work, obey the Constitution, and wants what's best for the voters, it is a rarity in America. But the next election, and I really couldn't vote this last year because I was moving out of state. Plus, by the time I figured out I wanted to vote, it had gone by a week before. So I didn't really make up my mind what I wanted to do about voting until mid-November of last year. And when people say, why do you want to vote after not voting for 12 years? My response is, because before last spring, I never had a legitimate driving force or reason to vote. I was a Republican, and there just didn't seem to, the people, Republicans, Christians, and conservatives, use as the reason why our country is falling apart are such minorities, they probably wouldn't make much of a ripple. So there really wasn't that much of a drive to not vote. Plus, once I turned 18, it was the idea of not voting and the action of not going and voting pissed off my parents, who didn't believe that you were a moral Christian American if you didn't vote. So not voting pissed them off, which made me happy. But now that I'm no longer a Christian, no longer a Bible-believing conservative Republican, I don't like tying myself to any political party, because I believe that if something were to happen where the Democratic Party was not the best choice, I have no problem voting for something else. But I would never vote Republican, even if a monkey was running against a Republican. Wouldn't do it. I will never vote Republican, because I know what the Republican Party is built on, what it stands for, and what morals and traditions they want to put into law, and they're not anything I want anything to do with. I openly and personally have nothing but disgust for the Republican Party. So I would rather vote for a third party, an independent party, a Green Party, before I would ever vote, and I would never consider voting Republican. I would rather roll over and die than vote Republican. never happen. I would rather abstain than vote Republican. Because you see what the Republicans are doing to our country right now. Who the hell would vote Republican for the rest of their life? You don't have to vote. It's not a duty. It's not an expectation. It's if that's the way you want to express your right to express yourself. There are different ways to express. Some people prefer to protest, to legislate, to write pamphlets. There are different ways to express your personal, political, and religious viewpoints. Voting is just one of them. I never judge people who don't vote because I didn't for 12 years. And anyone who thinks you have to vote or you're not a good American doesn't understand what being an American is. An American doesn't look like one type of person. There are different kinds of Americans. And anyone who thinks that a white, cis, heterosexual person is the stereotype for being an American, they're racist. There is no such thing as what an American is, because America is a melting pot. Any type of ethnicity, color of hair, color of eyes, or any form of background is what an American could be. Also, there are a lot of Republicans out there that actually want to repeal a certain amendment that gives African Americans and women the right to vote. Think about that. These moral people with an image of respectability want to remove African Americans and women from voting. You remember back when Harris was running for president last year, and there was a TV ad where women in Republican states would lie about who they voted for in order to survive and to keep the peace. That's the reality a lot of women endure just growing up in the Midwest or wherever there's a very big expectation in their community or home to vote according to the authority figure in the home. Conservative Republicans, especially the extremist groups, want to repeal African American and women of all nationalities their right to vote, just because they believe that women vote against Republican conservative values. I mean, any woman who has self-respect and believes in autonomy and equality between the sexes and doesn't see white people as the epitome of ethnicity wouldn't want to vote Republican, because Republican core values undermines women's equality. I mean, it always astounds me how women, minorities, and queer people vote Republican when Republicans, real Republican conservative politicians, probably would celebrate if all those people vanished overnight, which is quite disturbing. There's a reason why conservative Republicans try to enact trans laws, anti-trans laws, anti-abortion laws. They don't want anyone but a cis heterosexual white man to have equality. That's why they only believe in two sexes, two orientations. Well, one orientation. Because the more variety and more of a spectrum you have, the less special and less in control cis heterosexual men seem to be. I read somewhere that by 2050, white people will no longer be the majority in ethnicity in America. White people will be a minority, similar to all the other minorities. White people would make up less than 50% of the ethnicity in America. I think that's a great thing to happen. Once white people are no longer the majority, but a minority, we're going to see political change in our country, and perhaps the good kind. right now is not the good kind at all. A lot of countries in the last 5 years have pushed back women's rights and ethnicity rights and minority rights 50 years backwards. Since we've overturned Roe versus Wade, we've pushed back women's rights before the 70s. No country on this planet has equal rights for women, minorities, and for men. We are the only first world developed country that does not offer mandatory maternity leave and health care. And I mean the health care that doesn't profit off stepping over dead people, kind of like United Healthcare. And living in LA, I met a lot of people from every country and territory on the planet. And what I heard a lot in Asia and people from Europe, it's relatively cheap to have health insurance. While in America, every time you go and have anything done, it's like a mortgage payment or the price of a house. And that's pretty low. Having any major surgery is hundreds upon thousands of dollars. It's not like that in a lot of other places around the globe. But America is decades behind other countries. The more socialistic a country is, the better health care and the better protections they have for minorities, women, and people who don't identify as heterosexual or cis. I think it's interesting how America believes in God, but they don't believe in universal health care. You don't have to vote, but just remember that every time a Supreme Court justice in D.C. makes a decision that erodes women's rights, those judges were appointed by sitting presidents that were voted in by the Electoral College and by the majority of human voters in America. I'm starting to vote again because I realize that the political party that's in power right now, the conservative Republicans, they want to do everything possible to erase, kill, and persecute anyone who isn't cis or heterosexual or white. That's what they do. Now, I'm not saying every Republican is a racist and a sexist, homophobic, xenophobic person, but you're pretty much that adjacent when you vote for people who are just awful. I live in a very red state, Alaska. We don't have abortion bans, which is kind of good. I mean, Anchorage is considered the best place for the LGBTQIA plus community. But compared to California, it's pretty homophobic. There's very little protections under the law for non-heterosexual cis workers, married people. So every state you have to look at. The states with the highest poverty, the lowest median wage, the highest stats for hate crimes and anti-trans laws, and the most deaths associated with abortion bans, and the highest murder per capita are always in red Republican cities and states. All that conservative, God-loving, flag-loving, and Trump-loving means you are in the places where you are most likely to be killed. I find it ironic that Christianity, I would say the most violent organized religion in the history of the planet, at Christmas time says it's peace on earth. I mean, you can't murder 200 million people in the last 1,500 years and claim to bring peace on earth. It doesn't compute. America, and especially fundamentalist Christianity, is obsessed with blood and virginity, purity, genocide, Zionism. And none of these things, none of these beliefs, none of these religious affirmations makes these places a safe place to live. They're the murder capitals of the U.S.